welcome to The Debate. We all know the standard Stoic ideal, right? Like Marcus Aurelius maintaining his absolute composure while the Roman Empire just fractures around him.
Right, the classic image of the unshakable emperor.
Exactly. But take that same philosophical framework and, well, apply it to a modern living room during a fight over finances. Or, a deeply vulnerable conversation about physical intimacy.
Yeah, suddenly that unshakable composure is put to a very different kind of test. It tests whether total emotional self-sufficiency is actually compatible with love.
It really does. So today we are looking closely at whether ancient Greek and Roman Stoic principles can successfully balance the necessary emotional control they demand with, well, the deep shared vulnerability that modern relationships require.
And our discussion emerges directly from the source material regarding this exact friction.
Right? So I will argue that Stoic practices of emotional awareness and active virtue fundamentally stabilize and strengthen a marriage.
And I will argue that the Stoic emphasis on emotional control, this relentless strive for inner fortitude, inherently risks fostering emotional distance, inhibiting the exact vulnerability a partnership needs to survive.
Let's move past the basic control what you can bumper sticker. We know the dichotomy of control.
Sure, the basic Epictetus 101.
Right, exactly. But when your life is legally, financially, and emotionally entwined with a spouse, pretending their actions are entirely outside your sphere of concern borders on negligence. I mean, the real power of Stoicism in a relationship isn't about ignoring your partner's behavior.
Okay, then what is it about?
It's about the cognitive mechanism of separating an event from your judgment of that event. When you stop assigning malicious intent to every friction point, you don't react defensively.
You respond thoughtfully.
Yes, you respond thoughtfully. It creates a foundational stability where patience and forgiveness can actually exist. Because, you aren't letting every single emotion dictate your behavior.
Well, baseline regulation is great. Yes, I don't disagree there. But we are talking about a philosophy whose highest aim is making the individual mentally untouchable.
Untouchable is a strong word.
But it's accurate to the texts. Healthy modern relationships require deep affection, radical honesty, and mutual emotional risk. If your primary goal is maintaining your own unshakable emotional citadel, you are fundamentally resisting the messy, intertwined reality of empathy.
I see where you're going with this, but...
Right? Like, Stoicism is far too easily weaponized to avoid expressing complex emotions. Partners end up intellectualizing their feelings, ignoring underlying hurt, and retreating into emotional distance. You stop being a partner and, well, you become an observer.
Okay, let's apply that observer critique to the most acute, high-stress scenario in any relationship. A deeply unfair accusation during a heated argument.
The classic blowout fight?
Exactly. If both partners are completely submerged in the emotional chaos, the situation escalates instantly and lasting damage is done. Stoicism in this moment isn't about observing passively. It's about active triage.
Triage?
Yeah, think of an ER nurse. They aren't ignoring the patient's bleeding. They are calmly assessing what needs immediate pressure so the patient doesn't bleed out while someone else is panicking over a scrape.
I get the analogy, but...
Stoicism gives you the cognitive space to triage the argument instead of just reacting to the panic.
But in this ER, the nurse is treating their own partner, right? If I am upset, visibly distressed, and trying to communicate my profound hurt, and my partner steps back to perform this calm, clinical triage.
They're trying to help.
But how does that actually read to the person hurting? It reads as stonewalling. It reads as a profound lack of genuine empathy.
I don't think that's inherently true.
While stepping out of the emotional reality of the fight to maintain your own rational control feels completely dismissive to the person who is actively bleeding.
You're assuming the Stoic reaction is silent withdrawal. I'll admit, poorly practiced Stoicism absolutely looks like stonewalling.
It happens a lot.
Sure, but the philosophy actually relies on the concept of impressions versus assent. The Stoics recognize what they called propatheiai.
Right, the pre-emotions.
Yes, those initial uncontrollable flashes of emotion. A Stoic still feels the sting of a partner's insult. Their heart rate spikes, the adrenaline hits.
The physical reaction.
Exactly. The difference is they refuse to assent to the immediate story their brain tells them.
Which is usually, my partner's attacking me, I must attack back.
Precisely. They pause to examine the impression. And in a relationship, true Stoicism requires you to communicate that pause. You don't just stare blankly. You say, I am upset by what you just said, and I need a moment to process it before I respond.
The problem is that the pause to process often becomes permanent. You're describing an ideal execution.
Which is what we should aim for.
But what happens much more often is what we might call the vulnerability deficit. A partner uses the mandate of managing emotions as an excuse to avoid the difficult conversation entirely.
Ah, I see what you mean.
They say, I'm practicing self-discipline by not getting angry about this recurring issue. Or, I'm maintaining my peace by not crying when I feel neglected.
But that's just suppression.
Exactly. They bury their true feelings under the guise of philosophical rigor, and over years that creates an insurmountable distance. You cannot have intimacy if one person is systematically avoiding shared emotional risk to protect their own rationality.
Yeah, but you're conflating genuine Stoic emotional awareness with emotional suppression. Suppression is driven by fear.
Is it always fear, though?
I mean, yes. True Stoicism, if we look at how Seneca or Epictetus actually wrote about human connection, is about removing the ego.
Okay, fair point.
When you strip away the ego's fear of being hurt, because you realize that true harm only comes from compromising your own character, you can actually be far more radically open.
Open, but insulated.
No, you can enter deeply vulnerable spaces. Listen to your partner say something incredibly painful about your shortcomings and sit with them in it without being sidelined by your own defensiveness.
Are you truly sitting with them, or are you just enduring them?
What do you mean by that?
Well, there's a fundamental difference between not being defensive and actually sharing the emotional weight. If your focus is constantly inward, ensuring your own character remains intact, you're missing the shared experience.
I have to disagree there. The only way you can safely share that emotional weight in a long-term marriage is if your partner has cultivated the character to actually bear it.
Cultivated the character?
Yes. You're arguing that Stoicism prevents vulnerability. I argue it's the prerequisite for it. This is where the Stoic emphasis on active virtue comes into play.
Ah, the core virtues.
Right. We aren't just talking about passive endurance. We're talking about honesty, patience, loyalty, kindness, and wisdom. Cultivating those specific virtues is what strengthens the marital bond over decades.
I certainly don't disagree that honesty and kindness are vital.
They're the core of it. It's not a list of rules. It's building the emotional infrastructure that allows vulnerability to happen without the whole relationship collapsing.
I get that. What I question is the relentless focus on self-sufficiency within that framework. Can a philosophy built on the premise that you should need nothing outside your own mind truly coexist with the messy reality of genuine care?
It's not about needing nothing. It's about...
But marriage is about carrying the weight together, sometimes admitting that the weight is too heavy without filtering it through a lens of total emotional control is the exact thing that creates the connection.
You mean just breaking down?
Yeah, saying, I am breaking under this, I have no control, and I need you. That is the vulnerability that bonds two people. If you insist on carrying your half perfectly, rationally, and self-sufficiently, you deny your partner the intimacy of supporting you when you are weak.
Being self-sufficient in your character doesn't mean never asking for help, though. It means you don't make your partner entirely responsible for your emotional survival.
But does it filter the rawness out?
When you ask for support, you're doing it as a choice, not as a panicked demand, because you're fundamentally broken without them. It changes the dynamic from codependency to a partnership of equals. You are strong enough to carry your weight, but wise enough to know when to link arms.
The risk remains, though. If you are always translating your raw distress into a carefully measured, philosophically sound request for assistance, you are editing your humanity before you hand it to your partner.
I wouldn't call it editing humanity.
But it is, and over a lifetime, that editing process filters out the raw, unpolished intimacy that makes a marriage actually feel like home.
Well, we're nearing the end of our time, so let's pull these threads together. My stance is that the emotional stability Stoicism provides is exactly what makes a sustainable love possible.
Right.
By separating our initial emotional reactions from our judgments, and by relentlessly focusing on cultivating our own character, we create an environment where patience, genuine kindness, and thoughtful communication can thrive, even in the hardest moments.
And my view remains that a philosophy rooted in emotional self-sufficiency inherently struggles with the demands of modern intimacy. Without a deliberate counter-Stoic commitment to raw vulnerability and shared emotional risk, the pursuit of absolute emotional control risks building a wall between partners, substituting true connection for peaceful distance.
I think we can certainly agree that misunderstanding Stoicism as a mandate to simply repress reactions, stonewall, or avoid difficult conversations is toxic to any relationship.
Oh, absolutely toxic.
The philosophical practice has to include deep, active empathy to function in a modern partnership.
Yes, completely.
Examining these ancient texts through the lens of modern romantic needs exposes just how complex human connection really is.
It really does.
Balancing the desire for inner peace with the inherently disruptive nature of loving someone else is a tension that doesn't have a single clean answer. There is still much more to unpack about how ancient wisdom fits into modern lives.
Well said. We leave it to you, the listener, to determine where that line falls in your own relationships. When conflict hits and vulnerability is demanded, the goal isn't necessarily to become entirely impervious to the storm.
No, definitely not. The goal is to build a structure strong enough to withstand the wind while keeping the door open to the person standing outside.